Hi and welcome to my channel. I'm Simon of Savage Reads and today I am back. Well, first of all, sorry, how rude of me. Happy New Year. I can't believe it's 2020. I think it's because this is going to be my video where I talk about my favourite fiction from 2019. So I haven't quite done with last year, but it is a new year. So I hope you've had a wonderful, wonderful New Year's Eve and I hope you're getting any resolutions that you might be having together. I'm still thinking through mine. Don't like the word resolutions. We'll talk about that probably tomorrow. Yeah, I hope that 2020 has started out delightfully for you. So this video I'm going to be talking about, as I mentioned, my favourite fiction books of the year, which is one of my favourite videos to make. Now I could have done a combined fiction and non-fiction video, which I have done before I think on this channel, but it was such a great year for non-fiction for me and a real turning point actually in my non-fiction reading that I wanted to give them their own space. So I'll link that video down below if you want to have double the favourites from 2019. That does lead me to, just before we get onto the fiction, wanting to mention poetry. I'm not a big poetry aficionado, but, is that even the word? But I want to mention 3 collections very quickly that I absolutely love this year, and actually I would have made doing a combined video of all my favourites even harder, because these would have probably been somewhere in my top 10, maybe 12, or in this case possibly I may have done a top 16 of mine. But yes, so the first one is Bury It by Sam Sachs. I talked about this really early in the year. It's the first poetry collection that I read. I bought it in America when I went out there the year before last. And yeah, I just love this. This is about queerness. It's also about bridges, which sounds really odd, but it really, really works. And it's just a book about identity and gender and queerness, and also suicides in gay men particularly, but it has got hope in it, so I would highly recommend that. Then The Perseverance by Raymond Antrobus, and I got to hear him perform some of the poems from here, and it was just incredible. He is a member of the deaf community. He writes about that experience. He also looks at father and son relationships, and that's actually a theme. There's either something that I really like in hearing about diverse groups through poetry and their experiences, or there's something about parental child relationships too, as well as, yeah, that's kind of thing I love. And these two actually have that combined in, or this book combines those two. Wow, it's tongue twistery already and we've not even got onto the fiction. In Fleche by Mary Jean Chan, which is just phenomenal. This has another thing that I really love in it, as well as being about queerness and about parental and child relationships. It's also very much about culture clashes, divides, and where they meet, and I love that. So yeah, all 3 of these I will link down below, along with these favourites, along with the fiction favourites, just because I absolutely adored them, and I would love you to give them a shot if you feel so inclined. Apologies, there may be some edits because detectives coughing and sniffing are still in town. They haven't gone. I've emergency ginger beer down there, so maybe a few breaks. Anyway, I will link those poetry collections down below, along with all the fiction that I'm about to talk about, except for possibly a couple of books, because there may be a cheat along the way, but there will be a separate video about that in due course. I'll talk about it when I get to it. So this is a list of 16. It could have been 14, but the sort of final 3, I don't like the word final. I am going in reverse order, but let's not say final. The first 3 that I'm going to talk about could have been a joint 14, because I can't quite decide what order I put these in from 14, 15, 16, but I'm going to do it with the most sort of recent one that I've read, I guess, and go backwards. So this is Laras Party by Carol Shields. This is a former Women's Prize winner, as 2 more that I'm about to mention will be. I literally only finished this just before New Year struck, well, the morning before. And this book was one that I was really, really not looking forward to reading out of the whole list, because it's essentially about a white middle-class man in America dealing with post-feminism. And I was like, ugh, don't think so. But what's brilliant about this is Carol Shields does some really clever, insightful, brilliant things where she makes society the butt of the jokes and the points that she's trying to make, and not Larry, even though he can be a bit, he's a really likeable guy. He's got foibles, which I think is fine. I like a character that isn't perfect, but he's not the bad guy in this. It is much more what society has led his life, and the women around him who really become they all come to the fore really in this book. And what I also thought was brilliant is that Carol Shields uses all of these women to show how stupid and ridiculous society can be towards women, but without them ever being puppets to the plot. It's all done really, really deftly. So highly, highly, highly recommend this. There's also an entire chapter devoted to Laras' penis, which has not made me laugh. Well, nothing has made me laugh in fiction quite that much in a very, very long time. I was listening to it on audio and just guffawing away with my headphones on. So we have that one. Then we have Property by Valerie Martin, which is another of the Women's Prize winners. This is set during slavery and is set on a It's set on a plantation where we meet Manon, who is the wife of the plantation owner, and she's been given a slave as a wedding present called Sarah, and Sarah is quite a difficult character. She's very forthright, and she doesn't do what she doesn't want to do, frankly. But also there's kind of a tension between them, because Manon knows that her husband has her sights set on Sarah if he hasn't already had them before. And we follow their relationship, particularly when Sarah does something very unexpected, which is based on a true story. I will not spoil it any more than that. What I thought was incredible with this and made it very different from a lot of books that I've read around this era or with this setting is that Valerie Martin uses comedy, a very, very, very dark comedy, in a brilliant way and snark to make you laugh, but then really shock you and make you question you're laughing at them, but also whilst enjoying the difficult dynamic between these two women. I don't know if I put that well enough, but you need to read it if you haven't. It's amazing. I want to read more of all of these authors that I'm mentioning. And the other Women's Prize winner is A Spell of Winter by Helen Dunmore. This was the first winner of the Women's Prize. It's the first one that I read that I hadn't. Well, it's the first one that I read that I hadn't in this project of reading all the ones that I haven't with my mum. We'll do videos on them later this month, so you'll get to see more then. But I just thought this was amazing. This is about Catherine and Rob, who are brother and sister. They have been left by their parents to live in their grandfather's crumbling old Gothic mansion, and this book is dripping in Gothic, almost like a sensation novel from the Victorian era. This has some really dark moments, some really dark twists and turns, but I couldn't put it down however uneasy and indeed queasy this book made me feel. I just thought it was exceptional. So yeah, I'll be talking about my mother about those three books very, very soon. So if we go on to book 13, which is unlucky for some, but not for this one. And it's a book that I have not stopped thinking about all year. And is one that I read, I think, sort of midway through the year, or even later towards the year. And it's Elif Shafak, and it's my first Elif Shafak read. This is 10 minutes, 38 seconds in this strange world, which is about Leela Tequila, or is it Tequila Leela? I think it's Leela Tequila, or is it Tequila Leela? Oh, anyway, it doesn't matter. It's about Tequila Leela. And she is a prostitute in Istanbul, and she has been murdered. And this is in the 10 minutes and 38 seconds at the end of her life, when her synapses are sort of all breaking down. And she tells you her story from sense or taste that she suddenly has in those 10 minutes and 38 seconds. And she also introduces you to the 5 people who really changed her life in lots of different ways, and those characters become much more to the fore in the second half of the book, which does take a very different turn, which at first I wasn't sure about. Then I kind of just enjoyed the slight campness and Scooby-Doo-ness of it, and actually in hindsight I really, really love, because it's a really difficult topic, and I think the lightness towards the end that Elif Shafak uses really highlights friendship and love and what you would do, the lengths you would go to for someone you love and a dear friend. So yeah, I thought this was incredible, really eye-opening, and I want to read a lot more of Elif Shafak's books too. Then on to Historical Delight, that I hope gets a lot more readers, because I haven't seen it mentioned that much on different channels actually. It's The Warlow Experiment by Alex Nathan, and I really, really want to read much more of Alex Nathan's work too. This is based on a true incident in history where a man advertised for someone to go and live underground with no contact with the outside world other than a sort of, what do you call them, dumb waiter that would go down and give them food and anything they needed, but they would have to live predominantly in the dark, although they would have candles, have no contact with people, and they would be paid if they managed to do it for, I think it was 7 years. The fictional versions of these are Herbert Powys, who is the man who has had this idea and thinks it's going to be the scientific making of him, and also John Warlow, who then goes down into the depths. And we watch as John deals or doesn't deal with being isolated in that situation. We watch how the house, because initially it could just be a two-peopled sort of story, but actually what's brilliant is there are then some twists and turns that come with John's wife and also his family and also the servants in Herbert's house. And I shall say nothing more than that, but it is a real treat. And I have to say, this list could have easily been 20 because of that ilk, the other historical novels that I love, there were quite a few this year, with these 5, and I think I'm going to do a separate video on my favourite sort of historical reads, not of 2019 but of recent times, because I'm reading some more in between now and then. I'll do it in a couple of months, because I want to talk about these books more. We have Jessie Burton's The Confession, The Confessions of Franny Langton by Sarah Collins, The Rapture by Claire McGlasson, Things in Jars by Jess Kidd, and The Doll Factory by Elizabeth McNeil. These are all stupendously good historical novels that I would like to talk to you about more, and I felt needed at least a mention from my reading this year, because if I hadn't read them, I don't think I'd have had as joyous a reading year as I had. Anyway, back on to, I think we're now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, we're on top 11. I thought we were top 10, but not quite. So, carrying on. Another book that I read very recently, and one that I thought was incredible, is Disappearing Earth by Julia Phillips. And this is one that I really hope we see on the long list for the Women's Prize this year. I can say that now, how exciting. And this is set initially, when the book opens, we follow 2 sisters who go to the river, and this is in the most northeasterly part of Russia, and they then disappear. And what happens over the next 11 months is we are taken into the worlds of 11 other female narrators who have some link to those girls all that day and what happened, and we start to get this picture of what life is like for women in Russia around now, and it is just phenomenal. I love how these women rebel, be it internally or externally. I thought the writing was just brilliantly done. Obviously, I think like that it's one of my favourite books of the year. I'm going to be saying that a lot. I'll probably say incredible, brilliant, and wonderful, stupendous, marvellous, the works in this video. I absolutely loved this. A book that I didn't initially think was going to make my top books of the year. And when I read it, I really liked it, but it has stayed with me so much since I read it. It is untrue. It's My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Atessa Moshfegh. And the more time I've had away from this book, the more genius I think it is, because in essence, it sounds a bit dull. It's about a woman who decides that for a year, she's going to be in this kind of drugged state where she just escapes from the world. She doesn't worry about it. People will drop in and drop some food, so when she wakes up briefly, she can have something to eat and drink before she goes back into kind of this drug state. She's sorted out all her finances. But really, this is a look at grief. It's a look at what's been going on in America in terms of class and society. And I thought this was all the more powerful because she's not a particularly likeable character, and yet you get to understand her. I'm not going to say empathise with her, but you get to understand her. And I think you do empathise with the grief that is there at its heart. Just superb. I recently got Atessa's book that's coming out in April, and I'm very excited. And again, it reminded me, I was thinking about her writing, and I think she is an author who I really like the style of. And Eileen, I had a little problem with the ending of, but the more I've had time from this, the more brilliant, clever, perfect I think it is. So we have that. Then, for the first of 2 short story collections that I have on my favourites list, is A Constant Hum by Alice Bishop, and this is currently only out in Australia. It's from Text Publishing, and this is it's kind of like the fictional sibling to The Arsonist, which is one of my favourite non-fiction books this year, which looks at the Black Saturday, they call it, which was these fires, and obviously Australia's having horrific fires at the moment, that happened quite a few years ago. And this is the fictional account in terms of what Alice Bishop does amazingly is create this choral voice that comes together really powerfully as we follow the people who survived the fires, both in the lead up to, during and afterwards, but also we move with the winds a little bit. And some of the stories are a couple of pages, some of them are a little bit longer, some of them may just be a paragraph, but you just get this incredibly powerful, visceral, collective voice of what these fires have done to the people and the landscape, and the scars that they've left behind, and the loss that they left behind, and how these people's lives have changed forever. And reading this, I think if I read this now, I'd find it even tougher to read because knowing it's happening at the moment, but I think that also makes it an even more important book to read. So yeah, I would highly recommend this. Then on to a book that I think probably should, this was like my winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction this year. It didn't even make the shortlist, but it's still my favourite. It's Remembered by Yvonne Battle Felton, and I just thought this was so special, and it made me think so many different thoughts that I hadn't before. This tells of Spring, who her son Edward has been involved in an incident with a trolley, which may or may have not been kind of to do with an almost not a terrorist act exactly, but the incident that happened sparked some riots in Philadelphia in early 1900s. She's by his bedside, and her sister Temper turns up, who is dead and a ghost, and they tell Edward their story and therefore his story, and they go back to when they were living on a plantation, and then what happened with the emancipation of slaves and freedom. And it makes you look at freedom in a really different way. I'd never thought before how terrifying it could be to be free, and this book really shows you that. Utterly amazing. I really loved that book. Then something very different that I wasn't sure how I'd get on with, but just completely fell in love with, and stylistically it looks trickier than it really is, and I'm going to show you for why before I tell you what the book is, because otherwise I won't be able to find these pages. So here we have some of the text. It goes here, there and everywhere. This is Lanny by Max Porter, and it's as brilliant as everyone's been telling you it is all year. I actually really want the Waterstones edition, which has got this gorgeous gold embossed leaf on it. Anyway, this is the story of one town where dead Papa Toothwort, this kind of mythical being, listens to all the voices and everything that's going on. But there's one particular voice that he becomes quite obsessed with, and that is of a young boy called Lanny, who's a little bit different from other kids and a little bit sort of, I don't know, how can you put it? There's something slightly ethereal about him, I guess. And it's how this obsession from dead Papa Toothwort kind of takes over, leading to something incredibly dark. And what's phenomenal about this book, I can't really put it any other way, is that it's how I showed you how the text is all over the place. That's because you're hearing all these different voices all the time, either reacting or gossiping or discussing what's going on, but also you get to see different people's interpretations of the conversations that they have with each other, and where things go missing or are left unsaid, or where sometimes subtext are picked up on. Words all over the place in here on the page, words all over the place coming out of here in my mouth. But this is where people pick up on subtext or create their own that wasn't intentional, at the same time as being about a young boy going missing and the trauma that leads to for a family, and this sort of mythical, magical element. Altogether, it's just brilliant. Separately, I was like, I'm not sure if I'm going to get on with that, but I did, and I found it incredible. Then we are on to, I've stopped doing the numbers, I'm very sorry. Number 6, we have The Offing by Benjamin Myers, which is just a beautiful book, a beautiful story. It's about a young man who is, he's kind of set to have a life either on the coal mines, or it's basically in the north, and it's going to be a bit grim. So in his last sort of summer of freedom, he decides to go and explore and goes on this walk, and he happens upon the house of a woman called Dulcie. And Dulcie is a really unusual, very different character who has set herself slightly aside from everything that's going on, and who, well, it's how friendship forms and how they change each other's lives in very subtle, very simple, but yet incredibly powerful and moving ways. It's a very gentle, tender book. And I just fell in love with the writing. I fell in love with the characters. I love Dulcie, and cannot recommend you read this enough. It is beautiful. Then on to the top 5. Here we go. So, at number 5, this is where I feel like I'm doing Top of the Pops, but with books. I wonder if I could do like a monthly chart on my channel as the year goes on, or would that give too much weight? Anyway, back to it. Number 5. So, Happiness by Aminata Forna. I have talked about this book a lot. I really love it. And this is a book set in London, where Jean is studying how foxes are migrating into the city and urban foxes are kind of taking over, and how people are reacting to that and not loving it necessarily, and sort of not embracing nature, finding different ways. I felt a bit Jurassic Park set up, you know what I mean? And then also Attila, who comes over for conferences once a year. He's giving a presentation. He comes over from Africa, and he stays in a hotel where he knows kind of all of the staff and everything. And his great nephew goes missing, and he, after bumping into Jean on a bridge, they're kind of slowly drawn together, both because when his nephew goes missing, she can ask her urban fox spotters for help, but also he uses the sort of the staff from various different hotels and basically people who've come from the UK and are working in those areas to help find him. And this whole book is about people coming from other places to London, but London stands for the whole of the UK, and making differences that are brilliant and unusual, but how people feel threatened by them, be it foxes, be it working staff, be it the parakeets in London. And what she does with this on so many levels is so brilliant. And again, it's another author I discovered this year that I want to go and read everything they have written. Then at number 4 is my favourite short story collection of the year. This is This Taste for Silence by Amanda O'Callaghan. Now, this is from the University of Queensland Press. I think you can get it online. I'll link it down below. Hopefully I'll be able to. This is just brilliant. This book is all about where silence has come in people's lives, and the pockets they either leave or the pockets that need to be filled. But really, they're all these stories about people at pivotal points in their lives, and then the story twists in a way that you just don't expect. The easiest way for me to describe this, but slightly probably the laziest, is to compare them to Karis Davies' short stories. I adore her short stories. I think they are phenomenal. Again, because they always surprise me. The characters are brilliantly written. The atmosphere, the tension, the setting, all done so deftly in so short a space of words. It's just phenomenal. And Amanda O'Callaghan is of that caliber for me. Utterly brilliant. If you don't think you like short stories, read these. My lovely friend Natalie didn't think she liked short stories, read those and was amazed by them too. So that's always a good sign. Sorry, Detective Coughing turned up again. So on to the top 3. Very exciting. So at number 3 we have Ocean Vuong's On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. This book is stunning. I mean, it's totally gorgeous. It's not briefly gorgeous, it's totally gorgeous. This is all about a young man writing letters to his mother. Him and his mother have had a slightly tempestuous relationship, in part because of what she has been through trauma-wise, having come from Vietnam to America. So again, it has that thing that I really love about culture clashes, culture divides, but also where they meet and how they can clash, but then what happens in brilliant ways after that. And it's also about him coming to terms with his sexuality. It's about him, like I said, the cultural differences that he undergoes as being Vietnamese, but also being based in America. And it just is so beautiful. I still haven't read Ocean Vuong's poetry, and I really should, because the prose in here is just poetically gorgeous. Yeah, I feel like that's a really short summarization of this book, but I don't want to give too much away, and also I think it is a book that you just need to experience yourself without too much preempting or too much praise being put on it, because if it gets overpraised or overhyped, it might not work as well for you. And I just think it's a stunner. He says don't overpraise it or overhype it, but it's a stunner. It's an absolute stunner. It's amazing. So yeah, this is just a subtle, beautiful book that has some darker themes within it, but overall, again, is about hope. I think that's something that I really like. I don't necessarily need redemption, but a glimmer of hope is always really good. I don't know if it's the excitement of talking about these books or not, but Detective Coughing is becoming insistent on being heard. Anyway, so on to the top 2, and at number 2 we have Tracy Chevalier's Girl with a Pearl Earring, which I fell head over heels for. This is one of the most beautiful, simplistic yet so evocative books, and incredibly sexy books that I have read ever. It's just stunning, and this is all about a young girl called Griette who goes to work in the house of the artist, and I'm going to probably pronounce this wrong, I apologise if I do, Johannes Vermeer, who painted this painting, and it's how she ends up being the girl that sits for him, and the tensions that creates within his family, but also her own family. And it just brings to life the whole era, the whole area and setting, the divides between classes, a love that kind of just cannot speak its name. And it's just beautiful, but so, like I say, deftly and simply and subtly done, yet, oh, sexy as sexy as sexy. And yeah, I was completely and utterly mesmerised by it, and I want to read every single book Tracy Trolli has ever written. And actually, A Single Thread is another book that I'm going to mention in that historical novels, because that was a book that I read this year, that came out this year, that kind of really had me within its pages, just completely wrapped up in it. But yeah, this is absolutely phenomenal. I don't know why I haven't read it sooner, but actually I'm really glad that I've read it now, because it felt like the right year for me to read this book and love it as much as I did. So yeah, that's my book number 2 of the year. So book number 1, I think you'll probably all have guessed it, because I have banged on about this book a lot this year, and it is just because I just think it is so brilliant, and it's just so different but so wonderful. And yeah, it does something incredibly powerful too, as well as just being a bloody good story, or set of stories actually. It's Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, and this won the Man Book of this year, and rightly so, because within this book, Bernardine Evaristo manages to capture the experiences of predominantly black women from the 1900s, early 1900s until modern day. And how she does it is just, it is a book that has a lot of coincidences in, which I don't generally enjoy, but in the right hands, or in the hands of the right author, anything I think can be possible in fiction, and this is the case with this book. So we go through 4 different chapters that are made up of 3 different female voices who have a link to each other as that trio. So it might be that we hear from a mother, then we go to a daughter, then we go to the mother's best friend, and that changes throughout. What then happens is, as this sort of patchwork of voices is being put together in this picture of the experiences of these predominantly black women from the 1900s onwards, we get it from different time points. Characters start to appear from other points, and you recognise them from another point, and then you find out more about why these characters are the way they are, and what's happened to them that they haven't mentioned to other characters within the book. And so you just get lost in this wonderful, again, it's almost like a choral voice. I don't know why I'm loving that so much this year, because I don't think that's my thing generally. Maybe patchwork of voices is what I prefer. Yes, that's what it is. And it just evokes these incredible women and the things they've been through, and the power of their connections, the coincidences that draw people together, how women can really help each other, how sometimes women can't. But yet there's just, it's one of those books that I love so much, and I talked about it, I feel so much, it's almost hard for me to talk about anymore, because I just can't. I feel like all I can say is it's incredible, it's amazing, it's this patchwork of incredible voices, these incredible women, but it's because it's all those things. And that's why this book has got a special place in my heart, and why, like I said quite a few times with quite a few authors, I'm going to make sure I read everything Bernardine Evaristo has read. I think she is a phenomenal writer. I loved Mr. Loverman, and that still has a very special place in my heart. I've also read Lara this year, which is her debut, and I thought that was brilliant, but this is quite exceptional. So, Detective Coffin couldn't help one final visit, could he? No, trying to get some attention. Anyway, those are my favourite fiction books of 2019, with a little sprinkling of poetry too, and a slight historical cheat. I would love to know your thoughts on these books. I would love to know what your favourite fiction books have been, or were, in 2019. Like I said, it's 2020. Happy New Year again. All of the books will be linked down below. Let's have a chat about it in the comments. And I'll be back over the next few days talking about my resolutions and my plans for 2020, and also looking back on some of my stats from 2019. And yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will speak to you all very, very soon, tomorrow. Bye.